I'm Deneb Puchalski. I work with Lie-Nielsen Toolworks. I've traveled all over doing trade shows and work at the shop. So come see us when you can. Same number of strokes on the other corner. Then come to the third of the blade, not the center, but the third, and do half the number of strokes you did on the outer corners. Then when you switch, pull back off the stop, get your new projection distance, and switch to the 8,000. Start in the center, do 5 or 6 passes, and then do the other 4 positions, the outer corners and the thirds, at the same number of strokes you did in the middle. That way you're polishing and honing the curve that you created on the 1,000 grit stone. And typically, you're going to want to go from that back to the straight line when you resharpen. Because if you just keep continually honing the camber, you're going to end up with a tighter radius after a period of time. Now it may be that you don't need a specific thickness cut in the center, and so you can get away with doing that for a while but eventually you're going to want to straighten it back out and reestablish it. Because if I'm using a camber on a roughing blade, I want a much heavier radius than a camber on a finishing blade, because I want to be able to set the tool up so the corners aren't catching at all, they're not giving a cut, but I want it to be just under, because I want to use as much of the width of the blade as I can. So if I'm finishing, I want my final depth to be about 1 to 1.5 thousandths. So that's going to be a much less of a camber than if it's on a roughing tool, which is going to want to have between 4 and 10 thousandths exposure, which would be a heavier camber. You also have to think about what angle the plane is held at. If it's a steeper angle, it's going to be a different radius for the 1,000th cut than a lower angle. So there are a lot of elements that come into play with a camber, but you also don't have to think about any of that at all. You can just put a camber on there and work with what you get, and that's fine too. It doesn't. None of this has to be really complicated, and that's the thing that I think that scares people about sharpening. There's this whole perception that it's this esoteric kind of mystery to get an edge. Define it, or just refine it, and get it boiled down to the simplest possible process that you can, and then make it consistent, so you can get the same results every time. When you can predict the result, then it doesn't matter what the medium is that you're using to sharpen, you're going to get a good edge. And then you start thinking about, okay, how polished do I need this to be? How sharp of an edge do I need? And I don't really go above 8,000, because up to 8,000 grit, there's a fairly significant noticeable improvement in almost any wood you work with. You'll notice that it cuts a little bit better. After you go past 8,000, it starts being a diminishing return. You don't get as much of a jump. What will happen is, and what you're doing when you're polishing and honing, is you're minimizing the scratch pattern. The finer the stone, the tighter the scratch pattern. That means there's less erosion points. So as you're working with the tool, it's going to dull less quickly. But that's really only noticeable in really nasty wood, stuff that tends to dull blades quickly. In those types of woods, then you will notice a little bit of a difference. Really hard, dense, exotic woods, you might benefit from working with a 16,000 or 30,000 grit stone. But most people never work in that kind of stuff. And so unless you are, you don't have to spend the extra money and have 10 different water stones. You can get by with 2 to 3 stones and get great results. You know, and I really resist the sort of philosophy that this should be difficult. It doesn't have to be. If you're spending more than a minute at your stone to get a new edge, you probably want to rethink what you're doing to some degree. If this is what you love, and this is your whole reason to be in the workshop is to get sharp edges, great. Spend as much time at it as you want. For me, the only reason I do this is because I want to create boards. And you can't get good results in boards without sharp tools. And so I want the sharpening process to be as simple and easy as possible. And I can sharpen freehand. I can put an edge, the same quality edge I just put on here, I can do freehand. But if somebody's standing in front of me watching it, can watch for 5 hours. Go home, say, oh, that was easy, that didn't be a problem, I got that. 6 months later, you may still not have a good edge because you've got to build muscle memory. The jig gives you the muscle memory instantly. If you guys are paying attention and you go home tonight, you're going to get the same exact edge I got if you apply the stuff that we just talked about. You don't even have to do everything that I did. But if you think in those terms, you're going to find that you can get a great edge. And then the key is to set up a process for yourself that makes it consistent. You can then repeat the result that you got. Yeah. Right. Yep. Just a little bit. I'm doing that. I wasn't close. I got all. So now the ruler trick that I talked about is to get rid of any residual burr that might be left. To just put the level of polish on the back of the blade that we have at the cutting edge itself. So I'll stick that down just with a little bit of pressure and just rubbing it up and down. Now it's kind of sticking down. I usually put my finger on the back end here so it doesn't move around. And I don't want to be any more than about a ½ inch onto the stone. And I just go up and down. Now I don't need to do any more than I just did on the cutting edge, on the back. But if you look at that edge now, you see a high level of polish right at the point on both sides. That also corresponds to about the distance back that you want the chip breaker to be set on the tool. So you haven't changed how the tool is going to function in any way. It's not enough. You've got to change by 5 to 10 degrees before you really start to get a higher angle. We've changed that by a couple thousandths. Moved a couple thousandths of material. It's still the same base angle when it's setting in the tool. The very first time when I first am lapping the blade, getting it cleaned up, getting it ready to work, I'll probably do 15 to 25 passes up and down with the ruler trick. Then I go and sharpen my blade. Once I've gotten it sharp, I'll come back and do the 5 or 6 passes just to maintain the power. And because I just used that blade, that stone very limitedly, I don't need to reflatten it right now. Next time I do a blade, I'll just spin it around and work off the other end. Then after I've done that, I'll reflatten the stone. Rework just to make sure that it's good. I use camellia oil on my blades to make sure they don't rust. Just keep a rag soaked with the camellia oil. It's not dripping wet, but there's elements of the oil on there. That just keeps it from rusting. I like these microfiber cloths because, for wiping down the water off the blades as I'm working with it, this thing will never get wet all day long. It'll get damp, but it's not going to get soaked. If you use cotton cloths or paper towels, you can go through a whole roll of paper towels in a day if you should do a lot of sharpening. Camellia oil is still lightweight vegetable oil rather than petroleum-based oil. So when it does get into the work surface, which it will, because I wipe down all my planes with it too. I'll even use it as a lubricant sometimes for the plane slide a little more. But when it does get on your work surface, it just soaks in. It's a vegetable-based oil rather than petroleum. And this you can just sort of hang off the edge of your bench, keep it sort of flattened out, and it'll dry right out. But next time you come back to it, it'll be perfectly dry.
How do you come out on the A2 versus the spike carbon?